Hi everyone, in today's lecture we're going to be focusing on infants and toddlers' cognitive development. We're primarily going to be touching on language and what that looks like for infants and toddlers, so stay tuned. In this lecture we're going to be going over theories of language, development of language, and there's a few videos throughout to showcase the importance of interactions and how they impact language development within the infant and toddler years, so the first 2 years of life. First, we're going to focus on Noam Chomsky and innate learning. So Chomsky believed that we are already predispositioned to have language mechanisms at birth, and that through the language acquisition device, which is a mental structure, we're able to understand and utilize aspects of language such as grammar, vocabulary, and intonation of our voices. And we see through innate learning that all babies are ready to go, eager learners, and that language can be considered an aspect of neurological maturation. So over time, we're gradually going to be able to increase our abilities to utilize language, and that we actually have specific parts of our brain that support language acquisition. So we see that Broca's area and Wernicke's area are specifically connected to articulation of speech as well as speech production, and so these are areas within the brain that support innate learning. We're already having those neural pathways connected to support our learning, and it just comes into play that we are born and start to utilize them. And we also see that through innate learning, because we already have a predisposition for language input, we can master this as we engage in language with others after we're born. Now, Jerome Bruner, he focused on specifically the interactions within our environments and how they are supportive of language itself. And so we see that Bruner focused on interaction specifically, and that children and their caregivers have specific ways of interacting with one another in order to understand and communicate, and that we have different cultural practices and preferences for social interactions that could require us to use communication through speech patterns and talking. However, we may be sending emotional messages through body language, eye contact, and other nonverbal forms of communication that can indicate that we still do understand and have interactions with one another through our social connections with the world. And so we see that this is clearly an aspect of social connections, and that our universe, even though we have different contexts of learning through cultural preferences, we see that each culture provides very specific aspects of how our language is going to be carried out and what children are expected to know and how they're going to communicate within their specific culture and within their home environment. And then this could change through different interactions with different people. And so this is specifically a theory that focuses on interactions are the key driving factor to language. Last but not least, we have B.F. Skinner, and he focused specifically on learning language through our behaviors. So he is a behaviorist, and we will talk more about him and other aspects of different things that he focused on related to behavior, but specifically today we're focusing on his connection to language acquisition and how language is reinforced through behavior. So he noticed that spontaneous babbling is usually reinforced, and babbling occurs around the first 12 months of life in a child's native language. And so he noticed that by the first year, we're seeing that babbling is usually reinforced. So the parents or caregivers are encouraging babbling to continue on, and whoever is going to be interacting with the child reinforces their behavior of speech patterns, interactions with other stimuli in their environment. And we see that through the parents and primary caregivers, they are directing and driving the increase in language within the child's life. And so we see that there are encouragements in frequent repetition of words, and so we may be encouraging the use of repetition in ba, 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 or ma, ma, even introducing other sounds and speech patterns within words, also increasing the use of words during day-to-day routines. And so you do see some overlap between learning through behavior and learning through interactions with Skinner and Bruner. We also see that adults who want to speak with children and understand them and read well must talk to their infants, and we have research to show that increased language early on is going to support children's interest in print as well as reading, and so showing children and modeling that behavior is going to support them to increase their language use already. Now, within the first 2 years of life, there are some key aspects of language that begin to develop. So listening and responding before birth is where we see that learning language via brain organization and hearing, and it may be innate. So we're considering how all of the theories that we just discussed and proposed can be prevalent and utilized to understand language development. So innate learning, learning through interactions, and learning through behavior are all emphasized within the gradual time lapse of children's language development over the first 2 years. And so we do see that before birth there is preference for mothers' voices, and we see that babies can kick and move when different sounds are played, as well as when the mother's voice is speaking to their child. And then as soon as they're born, there's preference for those speech sounds and mother's language, and there's gradual selective listening. And like I said in the previous slide, we see that children around the first 12 months are beginning to babble, and so we're noticing that even around the first 6 months, that ability to distinguish sounds and gestures in our own language is present. And so we can see that children are then starting to increase their ability to utilize their own language and practice this communication with their caregivers. And then if there is the interest in that communication back through the interactions and through modeling of those behaviors, we'll see that there is then more usage of those neural pathways within language. So when looking at language development from about 6 to 12 months, we see that there is progressive increase in how children are able to communicate. And so we see receptive and expressive language are coming forth into the infant's ability to communicate. And so around 6 to 12 months, children are able to distinguish sounds and gestures in their own language. And so this is being able to take in what is being said to them. This could be that they're turning their head when their name is called, or when something is being shown to them, they're able to recognize the voice of the parent or caregiver. We also see that as soon as 18 months and even earlier on, that following simple commands within their own language is something that children are able to do. So pick up your shoe, or look over here, mira, aquí. So there's different things that an infant and young toddler are able to do in use of receptive language. We also see that expressive language, so not only being able to understand sounds, words, and utterances that others produce, and being able to communicate through their use of understanding, we can also see that they can then express back their understanding. So they're starting to produce their own sounds. Vocabulary is being shown, as well as utterances. We also see that around 8 months, in addition to babbling and repetition of certain syllables such as ba, 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 and da, 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 that infants start to show interest in print. And so they might be intensely looking at books or pointing at pictures. And so these are the beginning stages of reading. And we also see, as we discussed in previous lectures, the importance of experience expectant. And so this is an additional link to wrap back around to the experience expectant brain architecture video, as well as a serve and return video, and the importance of showcasing interactions and how interactions are vital for language development. And then again, with the production of first words around 12 months, we see that children have increased vocabulary. So once spoken vocabulary reaches about 50 words, we do see that it builds extremely quickly, of rates from 50 to 100 words per minute. And on the next slide, you'll see that there is Sorry, my audio got cut off, but I'll just move to the next slide. That makes it easier for you. So it's important that you know this table right here, and this one is self-explanatory, but your text does go into more detail, and I'd recommend rereading that if you need more information on the stages of spoken language within the first 2 years. So just recognizing key points. If I were to ask you to reference this, you'd know that around 3 to 6 months, we see that new sounds are being produced. Children are engaging in more vowel sounds, so oo, ah, e, o. We also see that by 10 to 12 months, deaf babies start to express their first signs. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. So they may engage in pointing and other forms of communication using sign language. We also see that there is progression with naming explosion. And so that happens around a little over a year, so about a year and a half. We do see that they're starting to name more words every day. Now, this does depend on, again, experience, and if children have experience-dependent environments and they are being provided with a variety of different things to engage in within their environment, if we have a wider range of opportunities to look at colors and talk about the names of colors, or to look at different kinds of toys, or to look at different kinds of animals. So learning different words when provided with different kinds of experiences, and how is that going to increase the amount of naming explosion that will happen within that time frame. Also, do we have opportunities for parental or caregiver engagement? Are we encouraging that naming explosion? Are we encouraging first two-word sentences and multi-word sentences? Are we encouraging pointing and addressing different parts within our day? So repeating step-by-step instructions, or asking, oh, tell me about this, or what is that? So those are things that would be part of the excuse me, interaction and behaviorist theories based on language, and how do we have caregivers who are encouraging and supporting those aspects of language. We also do see that overextension occurs, and so this is when there is a use of words within different situations and their meanings become extended or overused, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. On this slide, I did just want to point out for deaf babies that we can start to introduce, in addition to spoken language and communication, American Sign Language. And so recognizing that deaf babies may need other forms of communication that are appropriate for their learning needs. And so recognizing that American Sign Language is the use of symbols to communicate. And the wonderful thing about American Sign Language is that even hearing babies can benefit from having sign language used as their form of communication. And so we see that this is actually expressed sooner than speech. And so in tandem, while using verbal language, we can also use sign language to communicate. And we see that this does bridge the gap of language learning. And so we are supporting a variety of learning needs for children. And so this is also a concept when we think about gesturing. So infants do start to engage in more gesturing all on their own. And so they might point to things. We see that pointing emerges around 10 months. And we do see that pronunciation is far more difficult than hand skills, so their ability to engage in hand-eye coordination, as well as utilizing their fingers and their wrists for movement, is something that becomes more apparent than speech earlier on. And so consider using sign language and gestures to communicate at the same time as using verbal language, so we can communicate where a parent or caregiver could sign the phrase of more. And so that's what you see happening here in this photo. That is American Sign Language for more. And so while I'm saying, do you want more, I might also be using the sign for more and allowing the infant to practice this with me. And so babies as young as 6 to 8 months old can begin to use sign language, and we see as early as 8 months that they can start to sign back to us. And so this is just a video to support sign language, and I encourage you to watch it for more information. When thinking about language development, especially when we're considering the interactions within our environment, we can look at a method called serve and return. And so this video goes into the 5 steps for brain building using a serve and return method. So it's kind of coined from the aspect of the game of ping pong or tennis, where a serve is given and then somebody returns the serve in order to continue the game and play. And so in the video they go into more detail about the 5 steps. So noticing the serve and then sharing the focus with the child, returning the serve by providing support and encouragement. We also see that then it goes into giving it a name. So when a child is pointing at something or a child is engaging in an action, we are giving descriptive language and describing what they're doing at that time. So if they're pointing and looking up at the sky, we might say, yes, I see you. You're looking up at the sky. Ah, yes, I see the tree that you're looking at. It's moving within the wind. So giving more descriptive language. We also see that steps 4 and 5 support taking turns and waiting, and then practicing endings and beginnings. So recognizing that it's important to wait for a child to respond, even if it takes them a moment or their response is different than what we're expecting, just to give them the opportunity to participate and have that voice, whether it is verbal or nonverbal in their communication style. We also see that the aspect of practicing endings and beginnings allows us as the adult to recognize when a child is ready to move on to the next steps or they want to try something new. And so I'd like you to take a peek at this video so that we can utilize it later on. This will be something that you need to know for future assignments that we talk about. So serve and return, that's a really important key video. And then if you do look at the former video on slide 7, you'll see that it also has more specific aspects about serve and return, just an additional video if you need more information to support your understanding of this topic. Okay, last but not least, let's talk a little bit about some cultural differences and the importance of culture in language development. So we do see that there are variations in culture and how child-directed speech comes to be. And I have a great video here, a few minutes long, that just goes to support that children who are bilingual are more likely to be able to respond to more than one language. Specifically, this video is looking at babies who speak both English and Spanish, and so when they were presented with different speech sounds, bilingual babies were better able to recognize different types of language for English and Spanish, whereas the monolingual English-speaking babies only were able to recognize speech patterns for English. So pretty fascinating if you're thinking about those early experiences within the brain and how important it is to put language at the forefront of one of those aspects of those neural connections. And so if you really want your child to be able to learn multiple languages, start as soon as they are born. We also see, again, the different aspects about mastering 2 languages can be crucial during this time frame. So we not only need to present children with languages if we would like them to be bilingual, but we do need to make sure that we are recognizing that this is something that is not always present within every home life and every school life and every community, and there are differences within pronunciation and vocabulary and adjusting our tones within different kinds of language speech patterns. And so children may or may not pick up on those different variations, and they may have a preference for one language over another. Even though we may be speaking 2 to 3 languages within our home, we may see that children still have a preference for which language they would like to engage with. So you might be speaking 2 languages to your child, and they may pick up and respond only to one, even though they do know both of them. And so we also do see that this is present within music, and we also see that children are able to recognize different languages within the words and the phrases that are spoken. And so these are expressed most often